Hey everybody, and welcome to my video on the Rolleicord Model 1. This is one of the original types of Rolleicord. In this video we're going to take a look at all of the interface elements on this camera, and I'll tell you how to use them, and I'll share some nifty tips and tricks for using this camera. It is not the best Rolleicord ever made, but it's very usable and still very reliable today. Hi everybody, and welcome to my video on the Rolleicord I Model 2 Model K3-511. That's quite a mouthful for a camera. We'll just call it the Rolleicord I for this video. This is a twin lens reflex camera. It has no light meter. It has shutter speeds from 1 second to 1/300th of a second. 100% viewfinder magnification, meaning that what you see in the viewfinder is the same size as what will be on the film. 100% viewfinder frame coverage, meaning that, accounting for parallax error, what you see in the viewfinder is basically the same as will be translated onto the film. It has a crosshair focusing screen, which we'll see later in the video when we look through the focusing screen. And it has no flash sync. So if you want to do flash photography with this camera, well, you're not out of luck. I'll show you how to do it later in the video. So this camera model, the Rolleicord I, is an advanced camera. For its time it was an advanced camera, but it's hard to call it really an advanced camera because it was a scaled down Rolleiflex. The Rolleiflex was the advanced, so this was kind of the advanced entry-level camera. I guess that's probably the best way to say it. So it's a step down from the Rolleiflex, but it is still an excellent camera. The main differences between this and the Rolleiflex are that the film advance is not coupled to the shutter. The focusing is done with a knob. The film advancing is done with a knob. And the lens is a Cooke triplet instead of a tessar. So the images from this are softer and have a little bit more imperfection character than the Rolleiflexes do. That said, this is still a high-end camera with a great lens. I actually happen to really like the way that these old Cooke triplets render, and if you're a portrait photographer looking for a 6x6 TLR, a Cooke triplet, well, you could do a lot worse for portraits than a Cooke triplet. Another difference is that this also has a slower lens than a typical Rolleiflex. This has a 3.8. A Rolleiflex might have a 3.5 or a 2.8 for the very fast ones. And so there's a slightly slower lens on this. These Rolleicords were made by Franke and Heidecke. They went into production, this exact model went into production in December 1934 and remained in production until August 1936. It was made in Braunschweig, Germany. It was preceded by nothing. Well, the Rolleicord I itself was preceded by nothing. This is the Model 2. It was preceded by the Rolleicord Model 1. But the Rolleicord Model 1 was the first ever Rolleicord. This was made concurrent with the Rolleicord I Model 1. The Model 2 was made at the same time as it. And this was followed by the Rolleicord Model 1A. So if you have your Rolleicord Model 1, we're going to take a look at right now at the buttons and the dials and the features, and we'll talk about what they are, and later in the video we'll go through how to take a photo with this camera so you can see what everything does. So first, right here are the strap lugs. This is what you would attach your camera strap with. Here's the viewfinder window, and the viewfinder screen pops up like that. The magnifying glass flips over this way and into place, and what this does is you focus your lens. Okay, great, excellent. Flip up the magnifying glass, and now you can fine-tune the focus to be very precise and take your picture. This also has a sport finder that will fold into place so that you can look through the back right there and take quick shots that are lined up for semi-distant things such as at sporting events or the like. Now I never remember how to get this back. I never do this because I have very bad luck at getting this thing back in place. There we go. So to get this back, once you've clicked it in place, you have to pull this apart a little bit and then push right there. There's a little indent on the inside that holds this clip right here in place, and it doesn't always want to cooperate with me in going back into position so that I can fold. There we go, the cover. Here we go on the camera's front, and what we have here on the top, we have the viewing lens, and this lens brings light from your scene into a mirror inside here and then projects it to the focusing screen that we were just looking at. And here is the taking lens, and this is what actually takes the picture. This is the shutter, and we have here the shutter speed selection dial. So you rotate this dial to select your shutter speed. The shutter speeds are 1/300th down to 1 second in B and T. Bulb is, as long as you hold the shutter button down, the shutter will stay open. Time is push it to open it, push it to close it. And I'll show you what that looks like right here. We'll go to time, open, close, just like that. Go to bulb, open, and then when you release, it closes. So with time is great for many things. Astrophotography, darkroom flash photography, which we'll talk about in a minute later. Well, not a minute, later in the video. And anything that you want to do with a long exposure. I tend to prefer time over bulb. Here we have the cable release port, and if you have a cable release, you would just screw it right in there. This is your shutter arming mechanism. You pull it this direction to arm the shutter, and you push it that way to fire the shutter, and if you are lucky like me, your lens actually closes at the slow shutter speeds. Here is the aperture selection lever, and it goes all the way from wide open at f3.8 to a very tiny f32. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Here we are with the lens open. We'll start closing it down to f32, which is darn near a pinhole. We'll go over to this side first because there's a little bit more to see on it. Here is one of the film roller retention clips, and this helps keep the film spool in place. This is your focusing knob that you would rotate to focus your image. Here's your film advance knob that you would use to advance the film. This side, this has the frame count reset button right here and the frame count window, and you can see that red dot lets me know that my frame count is reset to 0 right now. And I'll show you how this works. This is a bit counterintuitive, the frame counting, so I'm going to show you that when we load film how to make this function properly. And then here we have a huge dent, and I don't know where that came from. That camera came like that, but clearly something significant happened to it. Here is the camera's back, and all that we have is the latch to release the viewing shade. Nothing else on the back. Some of them, like this one, might have at one point had a guide for depth of field or exposure on the back of it, but probably not. Here on the bottom, we have a few things to look at. We have the 4 feet for resting it. We have the tripod bushing. Now, it comes with a 3/8 inch tripod receptacle, so you can get an adapter for 3/8 to 1/4 20. 1/4 20 is the standard that we use now. Otherwise, this won't accept a standard tripod. Here's the film back release. Film back release. It's going to release. Okay, there it goes. Film back release. And then this is the red window. This is not the red window that you use to count the frames. If you count the frames off this red window, you're going to get 8 6x6 frames instead of 12. So this is used for lining up the film when you load it, and I will show you how to do that when we load film briefly. To open the camera, you simply lift up on that notch that we just saw on the bottom. Here is the camera's inside. This is the film take-up spool, or this is the film load spool area. This is for the new spool of film, and when you're finished with your film, you simply move the film to the top, and to load it, the empty film, you just pull out on the film advance knob and rotate it until it picks it up. There we go. These are film rollers that help keep the film properly aligned as it moves through the camera, and these film guide rails do the same. They also work with the film pressure plate, which is on the back of the camera right here, to keep the film flat on plane. New film is loaded right here, and here you can also see that you've got your camera body serial number inside the camera, and this will, using Franke and Heideke's databases and the Rolleicord databases, you can learn a lot about your camera based on the body serial number and the lens serial numbers. To load film, since we have it open, we might as well load film at this point. You simply pull this out. This is the tension post, and then just rotate it so that it doesn't shoot back into place. And you can insert this new roll of film, and then just rotate that until the spring pulls it back into alignment. We're going to pull out a leader. We're going to feed it into the take-up spool. There we go. I'm going to feed it into the take-up spool and advance it until this double arrow reaches here, and then we're going to close it. We're not quite done yet. Next thing that we need to do is advance the film until we see the number 1 right here. There we go. There's the number 1. So, with that done, we're going to hit this film rewind button, and you just push it towards the back of the camera, and you can see that it automatically advanced to the first frame. Okay, film is loaded. Let's take some pictures now. So this camera doesn't have a light meter, so the first thing that you've got to do is figure out your light meter reading. If you're going to use the Sunny 16 rule, you can. That's a very easy way to do things, and the way that that works is that at an aperture of f16, your shutter speed should be the reciprocal of your film speed. What that means is that if you have ISO 100 film, if your subject is in full sun, then f16. So in full sun, 100 ISO film, 100th of a second shutter speed, f16. And there are different guides for different lighting scenarios. Partial sun could be f11, shade would be f8, give or take, things like that. With this camera, 100 ISO film is exceedingly fast for it. Let's assuming that everything works correctly, if you go up to 1/300th of a second, that would be, and assuming your timing is correct, which it is not on mine, that would be f22. I'm sorry, wrong way. That would be f11. Okay, so f16, 1/50th is f22, 1/25th is f32, meaning that with 100 ISO film on a sunny day, you've got anywhere from f11 to f32, 1/25th to 1/300th of a second. It's not a huge range. Now let's say you had 25 ISO film. If you had Ilford Pan F50 and you pulled it one stop to 25, which makes it absolutely the most brilliant black and white slow speed film out there. If you've never used Pan F50 at 25 and pulled it, it's an experiment absolutely worth trying. That's 2 stops slower, so that gives us a whole lot more we can do. So f16 at 25 ISO with a sunny subject is 1/25th of a second. Well, we now have 2 slower stops, which would be 1/10th and 1/5, and we also have 1, 2, 3 faster stops, which would be f11, f8, and f5.6. So using a 25 ISO film in full sun gives us from f5.6 to f32. Using a 25 ISO film in the shade gives us 2 more stops. We could go anywhere from f3.8 up to f16. So this camera was designed at a time when film speeds were significantly slower than they are today. And so using a slow speed film in this in sunny conditions is going to be a great way to use it. If you are going to be shooting inside, then you can still use a faster film, a 200 or a 400, in lower lighting conditions. So we're going to take a picture with this camera now, and we're outside, and we've got a picture that we're going to take of someone standing in the sun, and we're using 25 ISO film, so it's f16, or we could go 1, 2, 3 stops faster, 1, 2, 3 down to f5.6 and 1/300th, and get a nice subject separation from the background. One of the nice things about medium format, if you've never used medium format, is that these lenses are kind of telephoto-ish, so you get a very nice separation of your subject from the background when you use them at the smaller apertures. So after we've got our settings, we're going to cock the shutter because we want it to be ready to fire when we are. Now let's open up the shade, and we're going to line up the subject, and we're going to focus. Here we go. Okay, there we go. That's in focus. That's pretty darn close anyway. Let's do a fine focus, and perfect. Perfect focus now. Take our picture. And after we've taken our picture, we fold everything back up, and we advance the film. And this camera will keep rolling. There's no stop at the next frame. So you have to watch the numbering progress in the frame window here, and then stop it when the line for the 2 is lined up with that, with the middle of that frame. Okay, so that's wonderful. Great. We just took a single exposure. That's boring. How about double exposures? How about double exposures? This is a great camera for double exposures. So let's say you take a light meter reading and it says 1/50th of a second at f11, okay, for your double exposure. Well, there's lots of different things you can do here. I tend to keep the aperture the same for both of my exposures, to keep the depth of field the same. There's no reason to do that, but it also makes the calculations a little bit easier. So you're going to take a double exposure. That means we have to have 2 exposures on the same frame that are each halfway to being properly exposed. So 1/50th and f11 is a proper exposure, then 1/100th and f11 is halfway to proper exposure. 2/100ths of a second is 1/50th of a second. So we're going to take our first frame, recompose, double exposure. The shutter mechanism is not linked to the film advance, meaning that this is an ideal camera for double exposures because it's very, very easy to simply take multiple exposures with the shutter by recocking it. This also means, let's say that, okay, you've got 50th of a second, and let's say f5.6. Well, you're going to do a double exposure, so we're going to go down to 1/100th of a second at f5.6, and we're going to take our first picture. Now we're going to come back 2 weeks later and take our second exposure because we want to do two pictures, seeing how much my beard has grown or something like that. Well, the next time it says 1/50th of a second at f4 or f3.8 because it's a slightly different lighting setup. Well, then you just go back to 1/100th of a second. There we go. Or f5.6, 1/50th at f3.8 is the same as 1/10th at f5.6. So you could simply leave it at f5.6, remove a stop of light to 1/25th, and then take your second exposure. So let's take a look at the viewfinder and see what you're looking at when you actually look at the viewfinder. You might be able to see that there is a crosshairs alignment structure in there. It's just a simple plus, and that's used to help balance out the horizon, for instance, either using vertical objects in your horizon or horizontal objects in your horizon. The viewfinder itself is 6 by 6 centimeters, so it's the exact same size as your negative, and accounting for parallax, it's going to have basically the exact same thing that's on your negative. But what's parallax? What does that actually mean? So let's say that you're going to take this picture, okay? And when you focus on something which is less than about 8 feet away with this camera, you're going to have parallax. And that is where you look through the viewing lens and you see the top of this spool. But the film coming through the taking lens sees the bottom of this spool. And what that means is that if you're less than 8 feet away, you need to focus and then raise your camera just a little bit when you actually take the picture in order to have the camera take a picture that is the same as what you actually saw. And of course, the closer you get, the worse the error is. That's why from 8 feet and beyond, parallax error is basically negligible to non-existent on this camera. So let's say that you want to use a flash with this camera. You want to do some flash photography. Well, I got news for you. There's no flash sync, so you only have one way of doing that, and that's what's called darkroom flash photography. And what that means is that you're going to turn out the lights in the room. It's going to be completely black, and you're then going to, well, probably beforehand, so you can actually see what you're doing before you turn out the lights, you're going to set this to the aperture that you want, and you're going to set it to time. Turn out the lights. Open the aperture, hit the flash, close the lens aperture, the shutter aperture. Now what that also means is you've got to pose your model or your subject, whatever you're taking a picture of, whether it's a person or a miniature setup or a model or a work of art, before you actually hit the flash. So you do all your posing, ready your flash, turn off the lights, open the shutter, hit the flash, close the shutter, turn the lights back on. That's the only way to do flash photography with this camera. Theoretically, you could go with a 1 second exposure or a half second if you're really fast, take the picture and boom, hit the flash. Regardless of what you want to do for your flash work, you have to manually trigger the flash because there is no flash interface on this camera. So some notes and interesting things about the Rolleicord I. It has no batteries, so the shutter will work whenever, wherever, anytime you want, as long as it's in good operating condition. As of this video's filming, you can still get these repaired. It's expensive. I had a quote on this one of $150 to $300 to repair the shutter, which right now only fires at a 300th, 100th, a 50th, and sometimes a 25th. So it's a bit spendy because they're still very complex, and but the guy who gave me that quote is extremely good and also kind of spiffies them up a little bit so they look a little bit nicer. But at any rate, you can still get these repaired as of this video's recording. Only 25,519 of these Rolleicord Is were made, so it's not an incredibly common camera. They begin with the taking lens serial number of 1,590,000 and end with the taking lens serial number of 1,760,000. So my serial number is 1,596,943, meaning that this is a very early Rolleicord I. It is 1,590,000 was the first. This number is only 6,000 beyond that. And because there were 25,000 of these made, it probably was not actually the 6,000th of them made. Bodies included an internal serial number ranging from 50,001, which is 050001, to 075519, which would be 75,519, and these were sequential. So if you want to know what order your camera was actually made in, well, mine is number 56569, which means it actually was the 6,569th made. I just was second guessing the serial number on the lens. So to figure out what number yours is, simply take your serial number and subtract 50,001 from it, and that will let you know what number in sequence yours was made. The Rolleicord I that followed this camera varied from this in only one way, in that it added click stops for the frame counter here. And what that meant was that the Model 1 does not stop you from advancing the film. When you wound, you could go from frame 1 to frame 12 and only take one shot the whole time if you just kept rotating the film advance wheel. The Model 1A prevented that. Originally, the Rolleicord I was called the metal-plated Rolleicord, or called the Art Deco Rolleicord. According to the Rollei historical book, which is the first of the links to butkus.org below, this was the first Rolleicord with a model designation. Here's another fun fact about these cameras. The pre-World War II bodies say DRP on the left, over here, and DRGM on the right. So this is a pre-World War II body because that aligns. The post-World War II bodies say DBP and DBGM, so the R's are replaced by B's, which changes Reichs to Bundys. And I apologize to all the German speakers for butchering that. The Rolleicord Model 1 was probably just the contemporary Rollei Flex body with minor modifications, such as the advanced lever being replaced by a knob and slower lenses. But in all probability, the actual body of this is the same as the Rollei Flex. That said, original Rolleicord prices were less than half of the comparable Rollei Flex models. Now, you saw me take the film out of the camera. One thing that you need to do when you store this camera is to make sure that the film count window is on the red dot. So I'm going to insert, there we go, I'm going to insert that spool. And I'm going to advance the film until we get to the end. The way that the film count window works on these cameras is that this counter right here rotates with the paper on the film back, and that does a bunch of gearing inside of it that causes the frame counter to advance. There we go. So once you advance through all 12 frames, then after the 12th frame you advance to the red dot, and this is what you want to leave your camera in when there's no film loaded in it, because it takes some of the, I'm told that it takes some of the tension off parts of the camera mechanisms. This also is a good indicator to let you know that there is no film in the camera, because the only other way to find out if there is film is to check the red window at the bottom, because there's no red windows on the back. So some things not to do with your Rolleicord. These lenses do, some of them unscrew, like this one. So it makes cleaning them fairly easy, but it also makes it really easy to mess with the shutter and stuff, and I don't really advise messing with the shutter unless you know what you're doing. They're fairly complex pieces of machinery. And on some of these, if you take them apart, including the viewfinder, you have to take the entire camera apart. They were engineered by Germans. I mean, what do you expect? They're going to be extremely complex. They're basically Porsches. They're the Porsches of cameras. Don't leave your Rolleicord in your car, because heat in the car can cause the oils in the shutter to get very thin, and then they get into parts of the shutter where they shouldn't, and then they get thick, and then you only have 3 working shutter speeds and have to send it in for a $150 repair because somebody who owned this before you left it in the heat. Likewise, if it gets exposed to extreme cold, the cold will break down the oils and cause them to get thick and gummy. Don't store your camera in a plastic bag or box because moisture will get into it and it will cause fungus to grow in a way that damages or destroys your camera. Don't let your camera get wet. It's not weather sealed. It definitely cannot stand up to being wet, and that's a really good way to destroy your camera. And just remember that your camera is a precision tool and should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So if this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track and that I'm producing content which is helpful to you. If you have any questions, please leave those below. And I am pretty good about getting back to you in a decent amount of time in a short period. If you have suggestions for other videos, please let me know, and if I have the equipment and technical know-how, I'm more than happy to make those. If you would like to subscribe to the channel below, and then you'll find out when I have more videos about photography and cameras. And one last thing before we go. Thank you guys for watching, and take great photos.